All right. Good evening, everybody. My name is Angel Rivera, and that should tell you this is Angel in the afternoon. I'm alongside nobody because I'm pre-recording this because this is going to air most likely Sunday evening at around 7 or 8 o'clock. So this is a special episode where I will go over the why U.S. and NATO expansion eastward caused the Russia-Ukraine war because it seems like everybody constantly tries to blame the Russians, like, oh, the Russians are the aggressors and they're this, that, and the third. They're horrible people. And, I mean, it's totally their fault. It is not Ukraine's fault. Ukraine bears no responsibility whatsoever in their invasion. But as we all know, it's much more complicated than that. There's no such thing as black and white and international politics and like that. It's always shades of gray, and it's not. It's Ukraine isn't at fault. I will make the argument and make the case today that that U.S. and NATO are mostly at fault for this because they knew. Number one thing they knew was Vladimir Putin's red line was Ukraine joining NATO because nearly every other country surrounding the Russian border has joined NATO except for Ukraine. So then we had Joe Biden openly talking about how, well, I mean, Ukraine can join NATO one day, so why not? Then that what ended up making Putin make the move of actually invading Ukraine in order to stop the invasion, or excuse me, to stop Ukraine from joining NATO. So that's where we're at right now. In today's special episode, we will be going over the history of NATO expansion eastward and why that was the main reason what caused the Russia-Ukraine war. But first, I need you guys to make sure you make sure you subscribe. This episode will be is being recorded at Thursday. What's today? June. Excuse me, March 6th, 2025. I mean, I can't read right now, so it's a June. It's March 6th, 2025. Let me double check that. Yeah, I mean, I'm thinking it's the 5th. I'm sorry. So everything I say here will be accurate as of March 6th, 2025. Anything said if it just because these won't air until Sunday. So anything I say after that, which turns out to be have changed, my apologies. But this episode, whatever I say currently about the Russia-Ukraine conflict is as accurate as Thursday, March 6th, 2025. So just letting you guys know that. So this is pre-recorded. So I'll be in chat most likely. The show will go about an hour, maybe an hour and a half, at most. I mean, I'm not going to go a full 2 hours like a normal episode Angel in the Afternoon. Oh yeah, make sure you also check out Angel in the Afternoon on Friday. If you missed it, it's on the INN channels and on my personal channel. It's a lot to discuss there about what's going on in Russia and Ukraine and so much more, bro. I'm sure we also touched on the uh Donald Trump's speech to the joint session of Congress. Sorry. I mean, I'm tongue tied right now, but I'm sure we'll touch on that as well and so many other things. So make sure you check out that episode, Angel in the Afternoon, which by the time you see this would have already aired. So another thing, got to get this out of the way. Make sure you like and subscribe. I said that already. If you guys are able to, my donation links in the description box below. As you guys know, the only way I use the money is to help improve the show and to maybe pay my internet bill every once in a while. I'm not going to use it for my own personal expenses because I have my own money for that. So it's not where so if you guys can't donate, that's fine. Just hang out in the chat. Make sure you make sure you subscribe, and have fun and enjoy the show. So that housekeeping out of the way, let's get started. So let's do this. Whoops. It'd be nice if I shared my screen. I always forget to share my screen, ladies and gentlemen. So this is being pre-recorded, so I'm definitely not going to be able to do what I normally do here. Let's get rid of myself. You don't have to see me now for a while. So, okay, let's do that. You know, just bear with me 1 second here. All right, there you go. All right, let's bear with me 1 second here. See. All right, that sounds good. This looks good. So, hang on. I don't know. It doesn't look right. Bear with me. Whoops. Oh my god. Okay, do that. Uh, okay. I'm sorry. There we go. We're good. We're good. So yeah, this is the thread that I kind of went over last week's episode, Angel in the Afternoon. I didn't go over all of it because, I mean, it was so long that we only had 2 hours, and we had, I had to go through this whole thing. So, yeah. So here we go. I'm gonna start with this. I'm not gonna play the Joe Rogan clip because I don't want to risk copyright. But what I'll do is I'll go through every part of this thread and go through the history of NATO expansion eastward after the Soviet Union fell. So here we go. Let's get started. Hope you guys. I'm gonna try to make this entertaining as possible, but hopefully it won't be too boring. All right. So by the way, follow this Twitter account, Kankoa the Great. So if I butchered that, I'm sorry, but it's an interesting account to follow, and you can, I think, learn quite a bit. So let's get to it. Thread. Russia's invasion of Ukraine was provoked by NATO expansion and a US backed 2014 coup, according to 3 decades of leading military and foreign policy experts. So these are some of the experts here. Ambassador George Keenan, Ambassador Jack Matlock, Senator Joe Biden, we know that name, Senator Bill Bradley, Senator Sam Nunn, Senator Gary Hart, Senator Gordon Humphrey, Secretary of State Henry Kissinger, Robert McNamara, Defense Secretary William Perry, Defense Secretary Robert Gates, CIA Director William Burns, CIA Director Stanfield Turner, Professor Edward Herman, Professor Noam Chomsky, Professor John Merschenheimer, Prime Minister Paul Keating, and Prime Minister Malcolm Fraser. So this is the thread. Let's start with this one. 1997. Open letter. NATO expansion, a policy error of historic proportions. In June 1997, 54 U.S. foreign policy experts. 50 foreign policy experts. Sorry, let me just. Sorry, let me do that. Just bear with me 1 second here. Trying to make sure this fits the screen for obvious reasons. I'll get back to the show in a moment. All right. Here we go. Should have probably adjusted this before, but here we go. Perfect. 50 foreign policy experts, including former Defense Secretary Robert McNamara and ex-CIA Director Stanfield Turner, sent President Clinton an open letter labeling NATO eastward expansion a policy error of historic proportions. They predicted it would provoke Russia, fuel nationalism, undermine nuclear disarmament, start to urging cooperation over confrontation. So they weren't wrong there, by the way, guys. So let me see. Can I see that? Nope. Oh yeah, that's the actual article. It looks like it was in Friday, June 22nd, 1997. Oops. I can read this real quick. And I don't think you guys can see it too well, but I can read it. Dear Mr. President, we, the undersigned, believe the current U.S. effort led to expand NATO, focus on the recent Helsinki and Paris summits as a policy error of historic proportions. We believe that NATO expansion will decrease Allied security and unsettle European stability for the following reasons. 1. In Russia, NATO expansion, which continues to be opposed across the entire political spectrum, will strengthen the non-democratic opposition, undercut those who are in favor of reform and cooperation with the West, bringing the Russians to question the entire post-Cold War settlement, and galvanize resistance in the Duma to the START II and START III treaties. In Europe, NATO expansion will draw a new line of division between the ins and the outs, foster instability, and ultimately diminish the sense of security of those countries which are not included. In NATO expansion, which the alliance has indicated open-ended, will inevitably degrade NATO's ability to carry out its primary mission, which will involve U.S. security guarantees, a country with serious border and national minority problems and unevenly developed systems of democratic government. Excuse me. In the U.S., NATO expansion will trigger an extended debate over its indeterminate but certainly high cost and will call into question U.S. commitment to the alliance and rightfully regarded as a centerpiece of U.S. foreign policy. Again, they actually nailed it because today we're questioning whether the United States should be in NATO or not. So this is back in 1997. Because of these serious objections and the absence of any reasons for rapid decision, we strongly urge that the NATO expansion process be suspended while alternative actions are pursued. These include opening the economic and political doors of the European Union to Central and Eastern Europe, developing an enhanced partnership for peace program, supporting a cooperative NATO-Russian relationship, and continuing the arms reduction and transparency process, particularly with respect to nuclear weapons and materials, the major threat to U.S. security, and with the respect of to conventional military forces in Europe. So that's the letter. Again, they weren't wrong there. So let's go here. Number two. Whoops, sorry. Hold on. Okay, we're good. Senator Joe Biden, by the way, we know him, predicts a hostile Russian reaction in 1997. In that same month, Senator Biden warned that NATO expansion into the Baltic states would provoke a vigorous and hostile reaction from Russia. All three Baltic states, Estonia, Latvia, and became NATO members in 2004. So let's listen to the senator here.
I think the one place where the greatest consternation would be caused in the short term for admission, having nothing to do with the merit and preparedness of the country to come in, would be to admit the Baltic states now in terms of NATO-Russian, U.S.-Russian relations. And if there was ever anything that was going to tip the balance, were it to be tipped in terms of a vigorous and hostile reaction, I don't mean military, in Russia, it would be that. So the way I look at the calculus here is I think the one...
So again, Joe Biden wasn't wrong there. I mean, there was definitely a hostile Russian reaction for all these Baltic states joining NATO. So let's go to number three. Australian Prime Minister Keating, a great mistake echoes historical errors, 1997. In September 1997, Australian Prime Minister Paul Keating called NATO expansion a great mistake, comparing it to the missteps that sparked both world wars. He argued that moving NATO's to Russia border signaled that Russia remained a potential enemy, jeopardizing the continental stability. The decision to expand NATO by inviting Poland, Hungary, and the Czech Republic to participate and to hold out the prospect and to others, in other words, to move Europe's military point to the very borders of the former Soviet Union is, I believe, an error which may rank in the end of the strategic miscalculations which prevented Germany from taking its full place in the international system beginning at the beginning of the century. The great question for Europe is no longer how to embed Germany in Europe, that has been achieved, but how to involve Russia in a way that secures the continent during the next century. And there has been a very obvious absence of statecraft here. The Russians, under Mikhail Gorbachev, conceded that East Germany could remain in NATO as part of a united Germany. But now, just half a dozen years later, NATO has climbed up to the western border of Ukraine. This message can be only read in one way, although that Russia has become a democracy in the consciousness of the Western Europe, it remains a state to be watched and a potential enemy. So he's, again, absolutely right. I mean, there's the letter here. I'm not going to go through the whole letter because it's, pretty much what I read there. And, so let's see, number 4. Ambassador Matlock, a profound strategic blunder. In October 1997, Jack Matlock, the last U.S. ambassador to the Soviet Union, warned that the Senate Foreign Relations Committee that NATO expansion was a profound strategic error. He argued that it would trigger the gravest security threat since the Soviet collapse by casting Russia as a foe, risking a self-fulfilling prophecy and hampering disarmament efforts. With 3 decades of diplomatic experience in Russia and the Soviet Union, Matlock had served in a critical Moscow Post, where he translated U.S.-Soviet communications during the Cold War, moments like the Cuban Missile Crisis. So this is quite long, and but this is what's here is pretty much what was said. But let's play this.
In the article, Ambassador Matlock writes about testifying before the Senate Foreign Relations Committee a quarter of a century ago and about the possible expansion of NATO. He told the Senate, quote, "I consider the administration's recommendation to take new members into NATO at this time misguided. Approved by the United States Senate, it may well go down in history as the most profound strategic blunder made since the end of the Cold War. Far from improving the security of the United States, its allies, and the nations that wish to enter the alliance, it could well encourage a chain of events that could produce the most serious security threat to this nation since the Soviet Union collapsed." Ambassador Matlock's words.
Mm-hmm. So there you go. Arms manufacturer push. NATO expansion 1997-1998. This is the real reason why, a lot of the reason why NATO expanded eastward. So this is what really matters here. Between 1997 and 1998, 6 major U.S. defense firms, Lockheed Martin, Northrop Grumman, Textron Inc., Raytheon, Boeing, and the former McDonnell Douglas. I assume that's how you say it. Spent $51 million lobbying for NATO expansion. New members had to upgrade to NATO-compatible systems, promising massive profits. Senator Daniel Patrick Moynihan, Democrat in New York, an opponent of NATO expansion, remarked, "Like any other American manufacturer, they are looking for markets abroad. Most every other customer they can think of, we have forbidden them to sell anything to. The companies that win those contracts will provide that interoperability to the aging Soviet-made systems in Eastern Europe, will benefit enormously from NATO eastward expansion." The Congressional Budget Office says the cost of a few nations joining NATO will reach $125 billion over 15 years, with the United States paying up to $19 billion of that. Critics of NATO expansion says that the weapon spending could create political and economic problems in Central Europe. So yeah, this is, of course, what it's all about. NATO expansion opens a huge market for arms. Arms makers invest in NATO expansion. 6 biggest military contractors have spent $51 million in lobbying. Arms suppliers licking chops. NATO expansion offers huge market for their wares. Stakes are high for arms merchants. NATO expansion opens huge market in Central Europe. That's what it's all about. The money. This is what it was all about all along, guys. It was this. NATO expansion, NATO, just money for the defense contractors. This is a lot of the reason why NATO started expanding eastward. And that's what led to the situation we're in today. Where we're this close to World War III. Europe has completely melted down and, basically decided that they're going to go to war with Russia no matter what, it seems like. So hopefully that's not the case. But right now, we are in a complete, we're holding our breath, hoping that Europe doesn't actually do something crazy like invading Russia or actively making that war hot. 6 senators, Senators Hart and Humphrey, expansions poisons relations. In March 1998, Senator Gary Hart and Gordon Humphrey published an article in the Los Angeles Times opposing NATO's expansion, warning that the move would poison U.S.-Russia relations and increase the risk of nuclear war, which is exactly what happened. NATO will move right up to Russia's border, seriously endangering the once-in-a-century opportunity for the United States to build a constructive relationship with that vast and important country. The United States will have responded to peaceful dissolution of the Soviet Empire with an in-your-face deployment of the NATO alliance right on Russia's doorstep. Further, NATO encampment right on Russia's borders forces Moscow to rely heavily on its large stockpile of tactical nuclear weapons left over from the Soviet days. NATO expansion poisons the well in U.S.-Russia relations. To contain Soviet communism, we fought 2 hot wars, a long Cold War, at an expense of perhaps $20 trillion. For 45 years, our citizens bore a heavy burden, including the risk of nuclear war. At least we had an opportunity to build friendly relations with Russia. But the arms dealers don't want that, obviously. So that's why, they expanded eastward. There was a lot of money to be made. NATO expansion puts that priceless opportunity at peril. risking a resumption, of a dangerous confrontation between the United States and Russia, two nations that ought to be friends. NATO expansion may prove to be the most damaging mistakes in international relations since the humiliation of Germany after World War One, an act of hubris most historians count as the cause of World War Two. So yeah, these are two senators. I already read most. I read that. So George Kennan, a tragic mistakes undoes progress. In April 1998, George Kennan, the architect of U.S. foreign policy during the Cold War, called NATO expansion a tragic mistake and the most fateful error of post-Cold War U.S. policy. He predicted it would provoke Russia, inflame nationalism, and derail democracy and disarmament, reigniting the Cold War tensions. In a New York Times interview, he warned that NATO enlargement would make the founding fathers of this country turn over in his graves. Such a decision may be expected to inflame the nationalistic, anti-Western, militaristic tendencies in Russian opinion, to have an adverse effect on the deployment of Russian democracy, to restore the atmosphere of the Cold War to East-West relations, and to impale Russian foreign policy in directions decidedly not to our liking. And last but not least, it may make it much more difficult, if not impossible, to secure Russian Duma's ratification of the START II treaty agreement and to achieve further reductions in nuclear weaponry. Exactly what ended up happening. I mean, come on, look at where we're at today. We are in a point where the Russians don't trust us. They have no reason to trust us. We keep moving NATO eastward. They've invaded Ukraine in order to stop Ukraine from joining NATO, and these experts had it spot on, and the United States didn't listen. Primary reason for that is pretty obvious. Like we talked about earlier, the defense contractors and the arms industries was due to make so much money that they didn't really care. They need an enemy. They always need an enemy, and Russia was always going to be that enemy. In 2001, Senator Sam Nunn, the then chair of the Armed Services Committee, opposed NATO expansion, warning that it would provoke Russia and increase the risk of nuclear war. We don't want Russia to feel threatened, so they deploy thousands of tactical nuclear weapons as they had before. NATO expansion aggravates the Russians, and no question about that. It causes an apprehension, as it should. I don't think it's in our security interest to have a paranoid Russia. NATO is a military alliance. When you expand the military alliance to the borders of your former adversary, you set in motion a certain reaction from them that is not necessarily in the security interests of the world. So this is him here. Oops.
It's fundamentally against our security interest and against the interest of the region. We don't want Russia to feel threatened, so they go out and deploy thousands of tactical nuclear weapons as they had before. We had a unilateral type arrangement in early '91, which I applauded at the time, where we reduced our tactical nuclear weapons and they reduced theirs. We didn't have an arms control treaty, though, no means of verification, and now we are legitimately concerned that as the Russians feel that NATO is expanding, as the Russians feel that they themselves have had such a severe erosion in their forces, they're going back to more relying on tactical nuclear weapons. We don't know where they are, and we don't know how many there are. So that's one of the downsides of unilateral moves, and as we take this next approach, as some are talking about, for perhaps unilateral cuts in strategic forces, we need to learn from the history of that experience, and we need to make sure that we, I think, follow any unilateral moves with some types of agreement that provides accountability and transparency, and that means the long, tedious negotiations that we've always had to go through. Frustrating, yes, but there is, in the final analysis, no other way to make sure that we can verify and to make sure that we know what's happening. So tactical nuclear weapons are a threat. NATO expansion aggravates the Russians in no uncertain
100%.
terms. There's no question about that. It causes them apprehension, and I do not think it's in our security interest to have a paranoid Russia that is in a state of economic deterioration. Some people differ on that, but I really would debate that long and hard, because I really do believe that those countries that want to get in NATO primarily want economic integration to the West, and we ought to give them that. But NATO is a military alliance, and if it's going to provide for our security, it's got to remain a military alliance. It's not a purely political or purely economic move, but when you make a move in a military alliance to expand to the borders of your former adversary, you set in motion certain reactions from them that are not necessarily in the security interest of the world.
Yep, 100%. That's what I just read, but it's 100% true. All right. So this is USAID. We all know about USAID recently because of Donald Trump, the Trump administration's obvious attempt to defund USAID and the liberal technocratic meltdown from the Democratic Party, or PMC liberal technocrats in the Democratic Party. Their meltdown is epic about this. But I digress. That's something we already discussed on Angel in the Afternoon. USAID funds Ukrainian media 2001. In 2001, USAID backed Internews trained 1,900 journalists and supported 203 television and 126 radio stations in Ukraine, reaching tens of millions. This effort aimed to bolster pro-Western institutions, setting the stage for EU expansion and NATO enlargement. 203 TV, 50 million TV audience, 18 million radio audience, 1,900 trainees. So there it is. It was an obvious propaganda effort made by USAID in order to prepare Ukrainians and have Ukrainians accept late NATO and him joining NATO and joining the EU as well. Which EU now lately we've seen recently that the EU is like all excited about having. They're trying to ram through Ukraine joining the EU. So in order to justify giving him more assistance. So we'll see how that works out. Hungary voted against it, so now they're trying to strip the rest of the EU is trying to strip voting powers from Hungary, which shows how much of a non-democracy this is. The rest of the EU already decided to give Ukraine EU membership and give them more money. Just that Hungary is voting against it, which is just a trip. They just a slight rock in the way because ultimately they're going to take voting power away from Hungary. So. But yeah, I digress. Here we go again. Their propaganda, the USAID propaganda is just nothing. Just not surprising there. All right, let's go to number 10 here. Internews fuels color revolutions. By 2006, Internews boasted of funding media that drove Georgia's 2003 Rose Revolution and Ukraine's 2004 Orange Revolution, aligning both nations with the West and amplifying U.S. influence. So yeah, that's that. So they're all proud of themselves that they had these revolutions in these countries, and both in Georgia in 2003 and Ukraine 2004. So there we go. Number 11. Senator Bill Bradley criticized NATO expansion as a blunder of monumental proportions, arguing that it broke promises to Gorbachev and fueled Russian authoritarianism. He called it a self-fulfilling prophecy that ensured hostility. Baker told Gorbachev, according to the treaty and the discussions, that there would be no NATO troops in what was East Germany. I spoke with Gorbachev last summer. He confirmed this to me directly. He said Baker assured him if you agree to Germany's reunification within NATO, NATO will not expand one inch further east. I spoke with the people who ran for president in Russia in 96 and in 2000. And one of them told me about campaigning in 96. A voter approached him and asked, why are the Americans expanding NATO? Isn't that a military alliance? The politician said, yes, it is. The voter said Russia might not understand and puts in calls, but they certainly understand tanks. We kicked them when they were down by expanding NATO. We created the very issue that allowed the authoritarianism now resurgent in Russia to claim that it was justified. I think it was a blunder of monumental proportions. It was a self-fulfilling prophecy driven by certain indenturist Eastern European types in the Clinton administration who believed that Russia would forever be the enemy. They thought we must protect ourselves when Russia becomes aggressive again, thereby ensuring it happened. It also had a lot to do with arms dealers and defense contractors wanting all that money. But let's play this here.
On Russia, this is a terribly sad thing for me because I spent a lot of time in the 80s and early 90s on Russia. I'd go there every year. I'd spend weeks there. I traveled all over. I got to know most of the people who ran the government and who are now there. And I think that right now we're confronted with something that potentially could have been avoided. And the fundamental blunder that the United States made in the mid-'80s, late '80s, early '90s, was the expansion of NATO. I mean, here we'd won the Cold War. We'd won the Cold War. And you then had people saying, well, now what are we going to do with NATO? Oh, well, I don't know. It's a bureaucracy. It works. What are we going to do with it? And so then the idea of expanding NATO. And the problem with it is this. During the negotiation for the reunification of Germany, Gorbachev and Jim Baker says to Gorbachev, you know, in the treaty it says, you know, no NATO troops in what was then East Germany. In the discussions, and I had this conversation with Gorbachev last summer, he told me very directly, the conversation with Jim Baker, the question was, Baker saying, NATO, if you agree to reunification of Germany in NATO, NATO will not expand 1 inch further east, which is what I went to see Gorbachev to confirm, because I care so much about this. Is this true? Now, the interpretation on the American side, Scowcroft says, well, he misinterpreted. Baker, I haven't quite pinned down. But Gorbachev says very specifically, he said, if you expand 1 inch further, if you allow reunification, Germany and NATO, NATO will not expand 1 inch further east. And then Gorbachev told me, Kohl told him the same thing, which was new information, right? So the first Bush keeps his promise. You assume it's a promise. We talk about partnership for peace, and you know, Russians kind of like that idea. And then Clinton comes in. What's the early thing he does in his first term? He expands NATO. Why expand NATO? And I read, and I've been rereading because I've been thinking, writing something about this, Strobe Talbot's article in Foreign Affairs about why expand NATO, and you read it and you say, huh, that's a reason? You know? And last summer again, I'm talking to...
Well, it's about the money. The defense contractors and arms industry wanted to expand NATO in order to get all that money from these states that were forced to upgrade to NATO standards. So that's what it's all about. It was money.
A number of people that I've known for many years, 2 guys who ran for president in Russia in 1996 and 2000. And you know, one of them says to me, I'm out campaigning in the Urals. Somebody comes up to me and says, this is 96. Why are the Americans expanding NATO? Isn't that a military alliance? And they said, well, yeah, but it's a military alliance. And the guy said, the politician said, Russians might not be able to understand puts and calls, but they certainly understand tanks, right? And think of it this way. What would any politics 101, somebody who's a friend, supporter, goes bankrupt, what do? You call them up on the phone and say, you know, Joe, it's tough. I know things are going to be okay. You're going to be back. You know, you show them some respect. And what did we do? We kicked them when they were down. We expanded NATO. And in expanding NATO, created the issue that allows the authoritarianism that has returned to say it was justified.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that it was a blunder of monumental proportions. When I was at Oxford, I spent a lot of time on the origins of the Cold War. And, you know, I read all these documents, and I mean, all of the documents. And it's, you know, the Russians were responsible, basically, you know. Here, it's unfortunate. It's a blunder of vision. And in the best of circumstances, it was bureaucratic inertia in NATO that people had to have a job. In the worst of circumstances, it was a self-fulfilling prophecy with certain people in the Clinton administration who were irredentist, East European types, who believe Russia will forever be the enemy, and therefore we got to protect against the time where they might once again be aggressive, thereby creating a self-fulfilling prophecy.
I think that was part of the reason that people in the Clinton administration thought that Russia would be the enemy forever. But I also think a lot of it was defense contractor donations and arms industry donations, like it was talked about earlier, that led to NATO's expansion eastward. There's a lot of money to be made. A lot of money to be made. Damn the world, damn the world, damn the safety of the world. If we accidentally start a nuclear war, oh well, we made a lot of money, so fuck it. So let's go to the next one here. Ambassador Burns, Ukraine and NATO crossed this red line. In 2008, U.S. Ambassador to Russia William Burns, later CIA director, warned that Ukraine's potential NATO membership crossed Russia's brightest red lines. This is all the way back in 2008. 2008, and that was even Putin made it clear years later, recently, before the Russia invaded Ukraine, that was his red line, that Ukraine could not join NATO. An elite cable titled "Niet means Niet: Russia's NATO enlargement red lines," Burns cautioned that the Ukraine joining NATO could split the country apart, spark violence, or even civil war. Well, I mean, it did kind of tear the country apart because Eastern Ukraine wanted to join Russia, and Western Ukraine was more towards the EU. So it definitely split the country apart. It did spark violence because of the coup in 2014, which led to all the violence going on in Ukraine today. Even civil war. I don't know about civil war has happened yet. You can say technically it might have been a civil war at one point, and push Russia to step in militarily. What happened in 2022? They stepped in militarily. I mean, again, they knew exactly what was going on, these experts. In his memoir, Burns elaborated on Russia's deep concern about NATO expansion, writing, Ukrainian entry into NATO is the brightest of all red lines for Russian elite, not just Russian President Vladimir Putin. In more than 2.5 years of conversations with key Russian players, some knuckle draggers in the dark recesses of the Kremlin to Putin's sharpest liberal critics, I have yet to find one who views Ukraine and NATO as everything other than a direct challenge to Russia's interests. So this is the cable that was leaked by that WikiLeaks leaked, which is what we read up here. Again, William Burns here absolutely nailed what happened in 2008. So this shows that the experts at the American government knew a lot of this would happen. They still did it anyways. So just worse. U.S. invests $5 billion in Ukraine's democratic aspirations. In December 2013, Assistant Secretary of State Victoria Nuland, we know that name, revealed that the U.S. had invested $5 billion since 1991 to support Ukraine's democratic and European ambitions, laying the groundwork for later interventions. Since Ukraine's independence in 1991, the United States has supported Ukrainians as they build democratic skills and institutions to promote civic participation and good governance, all which are preconditions for Ukraine to achieve its European aspirations. We've invested over $5 billion to assist Ukraine in these other goals. We were sure a secure and prosperous and democratic Ukraine. So this video, it looks like it's been filmed with a potato, but let's deal with it.
Since Ukraine's independence in 1991, the United States has supported Ukrainians as they build democratic skills and institutions, as they promote civic participation and good governance, all of which are preconditions for Ukraine to achieve its European aspirations. We've invested over $5 billion to assist Ukraine in these and other goals that will ensure a secure and prosperous and democratic Ukraine.
That looks like it was filmed with a potato. But whatever, there's not much we can do about that. Nuland and senators rally Maidan protesters. In December 2013, Nuland and senators John McCain and Chris Murphy rallied Maidan protesters alongside Svoboda, I butchered that, leader, that name there, Oleg something. Tiny Book, I butchered that name horribly. But we're going to move on, let's call them Oleg. In a leaked February 2014 document called a leaked February 2014 call showed Nuland plotting Ukraine's new government, favoring Arseniy Yatsenyuk, I butchered that too, who later became prime minister post-coup. During the call, she described Tanihibuk, who provided the extremists that escalated the violence, as one of the opposition leaders they were working with. So this is the video here. Let's watch.
Did you see any evidence of U.S. involvement? Did you feel their presence from the U.S.?
Очень частыми гостями были представители Соединенных Штатов, конгрессмены, были госпожа Нуланд.
There's Victoria Nuland. Miss Nuland visited on numerous occasions, and we had discussed state affairs with her.
Приезжала очень часто, у нас были с ней дискуссии. Но после этих дискуссий она шла на Майдан.
After that, she went to Maidan in support of the protesters
И поддерживала протестующих. И обвиняла
and accused police of abuse of power.
применялась чрезмерно сила. На самом деле эти все месседжи мы видели дань.
Look who that is, Senator from Connecticut, Chris Murphy. What the fuck he doing there? He has no business being in Ukraine during that time. There goes John McCain as well. So.
To celebrate with you a Ukraine that stands with Europe and stands with the United States.
Well, members of Congress were visiting Ukraine during that period, most famously Congressman John McCain. So some of the people who were challenging their government, their elected government at that point, were being told by the senior U.S. official, a person who ran for president and a top official in the U.S. Congress, that the U.S. was with them.
I'm Senator John McCain, and it's always a pleasure to be back in Ukraine.
No, there goes John McCain. There goes John McCain, ladies and gentlemen. He also was heavily involved in this coup of Yanukovych. So
Senator McCain was, in a sense, giving the people in the Maidan a feeling that they had the backing of the most powerful country on earth.
This is about the future you want for your country. This is about the future you deserve.
Делегаций много приезжало. Я говорил, что нельзя говорить, во-первых, неправду. Нельзя становиться на сторону митингующих и отстаивать их права, создавая тем самым и углубляя конфликт. Когда митингующие захватывают правительственные здания и учреждения, скажите, допустимо ли это в любой другой стране, например, чтобы посол Украины пришел...
That's a good point. I mean, let's go back here for a second. Sorry about that. Something I missed here. All right. There you go. Let's just go from there.
Делегаций много приезжало. Я говорил, что нельзя говорить, во-первых, неправду. Нельзя становиться на сторону митингующих и отстаивать...
Yeah, the U.S. Officials had no business siding with these protesters, these alleged protesters. I don't even think they're real. I think they were sent there by the U.S. and, deep state and stuff. And USAID, they funded all this. So I don't think these really were real protesters. And even if they were, they shouldn't have been siding openly with that, especially since the elected government of Ukraine was still legally in power. So there's really no reason for them to be there. And trying to, we're pro-democracy. Yeah, except that we're trying to overthrow the democratically elected government in Ukraine at the time.
Их права, создавая тем самым и углубляя конфликт. Когда митингующие захватывают правительственные здания и учреждения, скажите, допустимо ли это в любой другой стране, например, чтобы посол Украины пришел к митингующим в Фергюсоне?
Can Ukrainian ambassador come to the protesters in Ferguson
и раздавал там
and hand around donuts and accuse police officers? No, they can't. Obviously, the U.S. wouldn't let Ukrainian ambassador do that. So why did the Ukrainians let these U.S. people come in here and basically pretty much help with a coup? It's just ridiculous.
Штатов Америки. Я считаю, что это недопустимо ни в одной европейской стране. А почему к Украине было такое отношение?
Who was your highest level contact with the U.S. government in this period?
Я постоянно имел контакт с Владимиром.
Ooh, look at that. His contact, the highest contact he had was with the vice president, aka Joe Biden, who later would become U.S. president. So there it is.
Байденом, вице-президентом. У меня были частые с ним телефонные переговоры. Но дело в том, что господин Байден говорил одно, а в Украине делали другое.
And the U.S. ambassador?
Посол Соединенных Штатов в Украине постоянно принимал
Jeffrey Pryat, U.S. ambassador to Ukraine. The U.S. ambassador received visits from the Maidan representatives all the time. So the U.S. was actively and openly participating in the coup that shut up, Fury. Actively participated in the coup that overthrew Yanukovych. So there you go. More evidence of that.
Мало представителей Майдана у себя в посольстве. Мы это очень хорошо знали, мы это отслеживали, и создавалось такое впечатление,
The headquarters in charge of the whole process was in the U.S. Embassy.
что в
Shocking
посольстве
there, huh?
Соединенных Штатов существует штаб, который управляет этим процессом.
In early February of 2014, as the Maidan crisis was getting more violent, there was a phone call that was intercepted. It was a call between the Assistant Secretary of State for European Affairs, Victoria Nuland, and the U.S. Ambassador to Ukraine, Jeffrey Pyatt.
Questions of credibility are being raised after a private chat between two top U.S. diplomats was leaked online.
I think Yats is the guy who's got the economic experience, the governing experience. He's the guy, you know, what he needs is Klitsch and Tony Book on the outside. I just think Klitsch going in, he's going to be at that level working for Yatsenyuk. It's just not going to work.
Yeah, no, I think that's right. Okay. Good. Well, do you want us to try to set up a
Klitsch and Tony Book
Hold
on
on a
the
second.
outside?
I think she's referring to Klitschko, the former boxer. You know, the retired heavyweight champion, which I think he's the mayor of Kyiv right now. He still is, as far as I know. So they were talking about him possibly becoming president, but they thought, no, that'd be too obvious. So let's just pick this guy and then go from there.
I just think Klitsch going in, he's going to be at that level.
Yeah, Klitschko. She's definitely talking about Klitschko there.
For Yatsenyuk, it's just not going to work.
Yeah, no, I think that's right. Okay. Good. Well, do you want us to try to set up a call with him as the next step?
Sullivan's come back to me, VFR, saying you need Biden, and I said probably tomorrow for an attaboy and to get the deets to stick.
So, yeah, Biden was the one who was behind the coup in the administration, in the Obama administration. Obama himself didn't have his fingerprints all over that, but Biden definitely did, the VP. So he was the one he was point man. You know, he was the one in charge basically of the coup.
So Biden's willing.
So you had this remarkable phone call where you have these two senior officials of the U.S. government apparently talking about a coup or how they were planning to restructure the government of Ukraine.
There you go. There you go, ladies and gentlemen. Just straight up, here we go now with the coup. Just straight up outrageous behavior by the U.S. But hey, it's not the first time we've done a coup. It won't be the last time we'll do coups either, even when now Trump is the U.S. president now. So let's go to this. Ukraine's 2014 coup and Eastern secession. In February 2014, Ukraine's democratically elected government was overthrown in a violent coup after President Viktor Yanukovych refused to sign an agreement with the European Union and a loan from the International Monetary Fund. Crimea, 97%, Luhansk, 96%, and Donetsk, 89%, voted to secede from referendums deemed illegitimate by the West. Shortly after the visit of CIA Director John Brennan to Kyiv in April 2014, the Ukraine's new government launched an anti-terror operation against these regions. By Russia's invasion in 2022, over 14,000 people have been killed in this proxy war between the East and the West. So this is beyond. This is from a documentary by Christopher Todd Nolan here. So I'm not sure I'll play all this, but we'll play some of it.
How did this suddenly morph from a protest into a revolution, as the protesters are calling, looking to topple an elected government?
By the way, this is before 2022, when the media were like completely like, what the hell is going on here? Why are we doing this? Why is this happening? After 2022, a lot of the Ukrainian government's connection to Nazis were dropped. You never heard that again. But pre-2022, you heard that all the time. You heard about the new government's connection to Nazis, the Azov Battalion. Today, you won't hear that at all. That doesn't exist. As far as the media is concerned, the U.S. government, there's no connection between the Ukrainian government and Nazis. So,
It's not an easy job to topple the government, to change the president, to sign an association agreement, but this is our agenda.
We are waiting that President Yanukovych return back to Brussels and sign that agreement.
Good to see you. We're here from America.
See, they were expecting Yanukovych to sign the agreement with the with the European Union and with the International Monetary Fund to take money. He refused. He decided to try to tie economically back to Russia, and that's what led to this coup, because that went against what the U.S. wanted and NATO wanted. They wanted Ukraine. They wanted to control. They wanted Ukraine and NATO, which is since Joe Biden orchestrated the coup as vice president, now as president, when he became president in 2021, he immediately went to, well, obviously we have Ukraine join NATO, right? I mean, of course, always was the intention of the U.S. government, and now that's what led to the invasion, and that's what led to where we are today.
Signing the association agreement with the EU would also put Ukraine on a path to strengthening the sort of stable and predictable business environment that investors require.
The free world is with you. America is with you. I am with you.
It would be
the free world is with you. America is with you, and I'm with you.
A huge
bag, but they've now been kicked out. The deputy.
Yeah, I'm not gonna play all this because it's 10 minutes, and so you get the point. I mean, this was obviously orchestrated by the United States government, and it's just beyond outrageous, the behavior of the United States here. It's like, especially this part here, shortly after its CIA director John Brennan visited Kyiv in April 2014, Ukraine launched an anti-terror campaign against these parts of Ukraine, which have voted to secede, which has started this basically civil war that's been going on in Ukraine even to this day. Number 16, U.S. allies with controversial Svoboda leader 2014. In 2014, Nuland, Biden, McCain, and others collaborated with Svoboda's Oleg Tanybruk, that name, whose party, once called the Social National Party, had neo-Nazi ties. Despite its anti-Semitic past, Svoboda fueled the Maidan violence and gained key posts after the coup. Svoboda, originally named the Social National Party until 2004, nod to the Nazis' National Socialist Party, had a controversial history. Tanybruk was expelled from Viktor Yushchenko's government in 2004 after a speech urging Ukrainians to resist the Muscovite Jewish mafia. In 2005, he wrote letters calling for action against the organized Jewry criminal activity. In 2013, the U.S. State Department barred him from entering the country due to his ranking on the Simon Westnall Center's top 10 anti-Semites list. Despite this, Tanybruk met with Nuland, Biden, McCain, and Kerry in 2014, supplying agitators who fueled the Maidan Square violence, and leaked call revealed that Nuland naming him a key figure in their plans for Ukraine's new government. After the coup, Arsenij Yatsenyuk gave Svoboda 3 cabinet posts, the deputy prime minister role, governorship of 3 provinces, and the chairman of parliament position as a reward for their support.
Oleg Tyagnybok founded Svoboda, an openly radical nationalist party preaching the good old principles of Bandera.
Вони готувалися і боролися з москалями, боролися з німцями, боролися з жидвою і з іншою нечистю, яка хотіла забрати в нас нашу українську державу.
Purge Ukraine from the Jews and Russians, Ukraine for Ukrainians, and so on. His statements got him 5th place in the Simon Wiesenthal Center Top 10 Anti-Semitic World Leader Rankings of 2012.
Слава Україні!
The most prominent among these extremist groups is an organization called Svoboda. The Svoboda Party, which traces its roots to the Ukrainian Partisan Party of World War II, was loosely allied with Nazi Germany. Until 2004, Svoboda had been called the Social Nationalist Party, a deliberate reference to the National Socialism of the Nazis. And we're not throwing the term neo-Nazi around here as an empty slur. The leader of Svoboda, Oleg Tanybruk, has openly targeted Jews and ethnic Russians in Ukraine for many years. In 2004, he was kicked out of Viktor Yushchenko's government for a speech calling for Ukrainians to fight against a, quote, Muscovite Jewish mafia. And in 2005, he signed his name to an open letter to the leadership of Ukraine entitled, Stop the Criminal Activities of Organized Jewry. And none of this was a secret. The BBC was already reporting on the danger that Svoboda's rise posed back in 2012. And the EU passed a resolution that same year condemning Svoboda as, quote, racist, anti-Semitic, and xenophobic. Yet somehow the US government thought it was appropriate to back these extremists. This is a picture of Victoria Nuland from the US State Department meeting with Ole Tannebuk in February. And this is a picture of Senator John McCain sharing a stage with Tannebuk in December. But why would the US government work with neo-Nazis?
It's simple, because they wanted Ukraine. And they knew that the neo-Nazis and their government would give them, not only have Ukraine join the EU, but join NATO, which is what really mattered to them. They didn't care. So here we go. Senator Murphy's U.S. role in Yanukovych's fall. In February 2014, Senator Chris Murphy, who stood next to Senator John McCain in Maidan Square rallying anti-government protesters, admitted that the U.S. had played a significant role in the 2014 ousting of Ukrainian President Yanukovych through sanctions and threats. He argued that the U.S. continued to support, including the presence of Senate and State Department members in Ukraine to help facilitate this regime change. He saw the coup as a chance for the U.S. to cement influence and economic ties, including benefits for Connecticut. If Ukraine had joined the EU and participated in a new U.S.-Europe trade agreement, which would have generated billions in opportunities. It's about money again. It's about money, and it's about arms sales to Ukraine and having Ukraine update their military and their missile systems to update for NATO standards. Sorry, I mean, I lost my train of thought there. So that's what it's all about: business, money, arms deals, defense contractors. They all get paid from this. That's what it's all about. I think it was our role, including sanctions, threats of sanctions, that forced in part Yanukovych from office. Now the question is, what can we do to support this new government? In respect to Ukraine, we have not sat on the sidelines. We have been very much involved. Members of the Senate have been there. Members of the State Department have been on the square. The Obama administration passed sanctions. The Senate was prepared to pass its own set of sanctions. And as I said before, I think that the clear position of the United States has been in part been that what has helped led to this regime change. So this is Chris Murphy admitting to all that. We'll
Very
watch
much,
some of it.
I think it was our role, including sanctions and threats of sanctions, forced in part Yanukovych from office. Now, the question is, what can we do to support this new government? There's going to be a lot of talk about an assistance package. With respect to Ukraine, we have not sat on the sidelines. We have been very much involved. Members of the Senate who have been there, members of the State Department who have been on the square. The Obama administration passed sanctions. The Senate was prepared to pass its own set of sanctions. And as I said, I really think that the clear position of the United States has in part been what has helped lead to this change in regime. So I know that there is merit in the claim that the United States sort of has these principles and then we selectively apply them. We get involved in certain places and then we don't get involved in other places. But I think if ultimately this is a peaceful transition to a new government in Ukraine, it'll be the United States on the streets of Ukraine who will be seen as a great friend in helping make that transition happen. This is really about supporting one of the biggest, most important countries in the Eurasian region, be able to determine for themselves what their future is. And it looks to people like this is the United States and Russia once again fighting, maybe not in military terms, but on economic terms in
Yes, it's another proxy war.
A country that we both care about, but really, ultimately, I think this is about us supporting the wishes of Ukraine. And,
Which, by the way, now you have the pro-Ukrainian people claiming that the Ukrainian-Russia war being a proxy war is a Kremlin talking point. So now they're trying to smear people that obviously know the fact that this is nothing but a proxy war. They're trying to smear them as like pro-Russian assets or Kremlin assets or whatever the hell. It's just ridiculous.
There is a U.S. interest here. We are in the middle of negotiating a new trade agreement with Europe. To my state, it's enormously important. We do 40% of our trade in Connecticut with Europe. If Ukraine is part of the European Union and thus is part of this new trade agreement with the United States, that could result in billions of dollars in new economic opportunities for the U.S. So we do have an economic interest in the Ukraine being part of the European Union, and we shouldn't be shy about making clear that interest.
Isn't it true that Yanukovych was elected for the first time in 2010 for one 5-year term? That elections were scheduled for 2015. The second point is, why is it okay for foreign ministers from other countries to show up during protest movements let's say in Ukraine, like the foreign ministers of Poland and Germany, and support the protesters against the current government there? Wouldn't it be something similar to the foreign ministers of, let's say, Mexico and Canada showing up during the Occupy Wall Street movement and saying, yes, we agree that your government is corrupt? And the third point is
exactly the same thing. The U.S. wouldn't take kindly to that. Why is the U.S. getting away with fucking, sending not only diplomats, but senators, elected officials like Chris Murphy here there to Maidan in order to encourage the coup? I mean, who the hell do you think they are?
Why isn't the West and America talking about the fact that a large or significant portion of the Ukrainian opposition right now is made up of far-right politicians, including from the party Svoboda, which openly is fascist and xenophobic, and they say that they don't want to join the EU because they consider the EU to be a bunch of gays and Jews, just as well as they say that they don't want to join the imperialist Moscow regime.
Let me take all those very quickly, one at a time. You're right. Yanukovych was elected, and I mentioned this before. I understand the difficult position here, which is that Yanukovych was elected, and we are not in the business of encouraging rebellions and revolutions.
Bullshit. That's totally made up. That's exactly what we do.
On the streets against elected leaders, because we ultimately think that elections, as you mentioned, are the place in which you should settle your differences. The
bullshit. More bullshit. I mean, of course, we do coups all the time.
The issue here is that Yanukovych lost his legitimacy to govern when he used force to try to break up these protests. And the United States didn't go.
He used force. Yeah, the police came in and, these are obviously, they were rioting. So of course the police comes in and, try to break up the rioting. And a lot of times that means violence because they're rioting. It doesn't mean that, doesn't mean he loses legitimacy to govern. Imagine that standard. Let's say Joe Biden was president, there was rioting. He said you send in police to break up the rioting, and all of a sudden now by that logic, Joe Biden loses his ability to govern or his credibility to govern. That's one of the lamest excuses I've ever seen in my life.
Go on to that square in any meaningful way until the president tried to break up the peaceful protests. That's why Senator McCain and I went, and we certainly got a lot of
bullshit. It wasn't a peaceful protest. They were rioting.
Grief from people asking why 2 U.S. senators are going to the square to support a protest movement against an elected government. We did that because we think that there were human rights and civil rights that were violated there, and we've always stood up for that concept. And again, I think that answers your second question as to why you had foreign ministers and foreign leaders who were on that square. It was because we're standing up for the idea that people should be able to lodge protests against their government.
It was a riot. There was no protesting.
You are right.
It's the same thing these guys would proceed to do during January 6th. Like, oh, well, they weren't protesting. They were rioting, which is why the police were allowed to do whatever they want. And now it's like, no, they were, by that logic, since the people in Maidan were rioting, they were destroying buildings and rioting and setting fires, then the police had the right to do what they had to do to protect property and protect citizens. But no. You're not allowed to do that, or else you lose legitimacy to govern, because the United States was looking for an excuse to overthrow Yanukovych his entire time. And now they found it with Maidan. And that's why Chris Murphy, John McCain, Victoria Nuland, all of these American politicians and officials went to Ukraine in order to encourage that. Yeah, keep going. We got to overthrow Yanukovych.
I think that there is an element of the opposition that has some real radical ideas, and there is an element of anti-Semitism that was present on that square. I will tell you from having been there, if there were 500,000 people there, maybe a couple thousand of them represented that viewpoint.
Oh yeah, it's not a big deal, guys. Out of 500,000, only a couple thousand people were anti-Semitic. So what's the big deal, right? Let's continue the coup and overthrow Yanukovych, right? For no reason.
And so, by and large, this movement completely rejects those radical and prejudicial ideas, and I have confidence that this new government is going to be inclusive and going to be tolerant, and it will be part of our job, I think, as members of the Foreign Relations Committee, to make sure that those kind of more radical elements don't have a seat at the middle of the table as the coalition.
Oh, but it turns out they did have major seat, even to this day. So total bullshit by Chris Murphy here. former Australian PM Fraser, NATO provoked crisis. In March 2014, Malcolm Fraser argued NATO expansion missile systems in Poland and the Czech Republic provoked Russia in triggering the Ukraine crisis. He warned that this could push Russia and China closer, threatening Western security, which is exactly what happened. Russia went to China, and now Russia went to North Korea, and they all are working together now. So perfect, just brilliant from the United States. Brilliant diplomacy. The move east, despite negotiations held with Gorbachev, was provocative, unwise, and a very clear signal to Russia. We are not willing to make you a cooperative partner in the management of European or world affairs. We will exercise the power available to us, and you will have to put up with it. The message was re-emphasized a year later when President Bush sought to place elements of the anti-ballistic missile systems in Poland and the Czech Republic. America said this was aimed at Iran. Russia would not have believed that. The West is acting like though the Cold War still persisted. What happened a while ago in Georgia and what's happening now in Crimea grows directly from those early mistakes made by the West. The West has been angling for over years now to draw Ukraine into NATO, and it has been doing whatever it could to support a pro-European government in Ukraine to oppose or to bring down a pro-Russian government. Fraser warned that the West's inability to recognize these tensions could drive Russia and China closer to a strategic alliance, posing a threat to the security of the United States, NATO, and their allies. What ended up happening? Defense Secretary Expansion's a Mistake, 2014. In his memoir, Robert Gates, former Secretary of Defense and CIA Director, called NATO expansion a mistake that carelessly disregarded Russia's core national interests. He argued that the U.S.-Russia relations after the Cold War were badly mismanaged, marked by unnecessary provocations. Gates criticized efforts to draw Ukraine to NATO as incredibly reckless. So let's see. 20. Kissinger, Ukraine must stay neutral. In March 2014, Washington Post op-ed, Henry Kissinger, former Secretary of State and National Security Advisor, argued Ukraine should not join NATO. He warned that to Russia, Ukraine can never be just a foreign country, but advocated for Ukraine to remain neutral, serving as a buffer state between the East and West. Even Henry Kissinger, the warmonger extraordinaire that he was, and how many governments he overthrew while he was Secretary of State, even he said that this is horrible. This is a horrible idea. And the U.S. did it anyways. So, Professor Herman, coup for Russia's hand. In 2014, Dr. Edward Herman, the late professor emeritus at Wharton and UPenn, I'm sorry I butchered that, but I probably did, Erminitis, I think that's, and Wharton and UPenn, argued that the U.S.-backed coup of Ukraine left Russia no choice but to act defensively, viewing NATO advance in Kyiv's hostile government as existential threats. Herman asserted that the West broke a promise to Gorbachev not to expand NATO eastward after German reunification, instead surrounding Russia with missile defense under pretext of countering Iran. He viewed Russia's actions as a necessary response to Western aggression, not unprovoked hostility, which is exactly my point. I mean, what if you're Russia, if you're the Russian, if you're in the Kremlin in Moscow, what would you do? You have anti-missile systems surrounding your entire border, and Ukraine's the only state left that is not part of NATO. What would you do in order to stop that from happening? You would do whatever it takes, even if it's an invasion of Ukraine, which is technically illegal under international law. It doesn't matter. At that point, you have to protect yourself and your people if you're the Russian President Vladimir Putin and the Russian government. So it's like you have to protect the government, you have to protect the people as well. So there's no way that the Russians would allow Ukraine to ever join NATO. My view is what actually happened was in Ukraine made it imperative for Putin to make a move. If he hadn't made a move in this case, where a hostile government has been in place in Ukraine with a definite aid of the West, with NATO coming forward further into Ukraine, and Putin didn't resist this, Russia was dead. I think he had no alternative. 100% true. I agree completely with that. The hostile government came into power in Kyiv and was put there with the help of the West. This constitutes a great security threat to Russia that would make a defensive action. So they're defending themselves. I mean, that's my point, too. I've made that over and over again on Angel in the Afternoon and on other shows I've been on talking about this. They engage in what the former CIA officer Ray McGovern calls subversive incitement. So let's look at this.
Russia was pushed up against a wall. My view is that actually what's happened in Ukraine made it imperative for Putin to make a move. If he hadn't made a move in this case, where a hostile government has been in place the Ukraine with the definite aid of the West and with the threat of Nato coming forward into Ukraine. If Putin did not resist this, Russia was dead. I think he had no alternative. The hostile government came into power in Kiev, and it was put in there with the help of the West. This constitutes really a great security threat to Russia. That would make it a kind of defensive action. You could argue that the real aggression came from the West. They engaged in what the former CIA officer Ray McGovern called subversive incitement. Maybe the most important point is that the West had engineered a coup in Kiev and placed in power a government that was definitely hostile to Russia and aligned with the West, posed the real threat that eventually they would close down the Russian naval base. So this was a genuine national security threat from the coup. There was that deal between Gorbachev and the high officials of Germany and the United States that in exchange for giving up East Germany, NATO would not expand 1 inch eastward. There was an understanding, and that understanding was violated very quickly. And the West and the United States have moved east steadily. They've encircled Russia to a quite remarkable scale. They've even placed missile defenses right at the Russian border, pretending that this was to protect Europe against Iran, which is a fraud that would fool nobody. So here now is the West again on the southern border of Russia.
Yep. No, that's what I just read, but I mean, those are all facts. Nothing but facts there. So let's actually make that a bit closer. Sorry about that. Oops, that's too close, I think. Actually, no, it's good. Professor Mearsheimer, I think I butchered that. West bears responsibility. Whoops, hold on. I just, a second. Just lost something here. Is this it? Yeah, here it is. I'm not sure how much. I may have to do a part 2 to this because this is like a long thread here. So we'll see how it turns out. Right now we're going on hour 11 minutes. I can't go on too much longer. I may have to do a part 2 to this or finish it up on Angel in the Afternoon at some point. Professor Mearsheimer. In August 2014, Professor John J. Mearsheimer blamed NATO expansion in 2014 coup for provoking Russia. He urged neutrality for Ukraine and warned that Western policies risk further conflict and Ukraine's ruin. In his view, NATO eastward expansion, the EU pushed into Eastern Europe, and Western efforts to promote democracy, quote unquote, in Ukraine beginning in 2004 Orange Revolution have provoked Russia by threatening its strategic interests. He contended that the 2014 ouster of Ukraine's pro-Russian president Viktor Yanukovych, which Putin labeled as a coup backed by the West, which is what it was, had been the breaking point, leading Putin to annex Crimea and destabilize Ukraine to prevent it from becoming a Western stronghold. Mearsheimer asserted that Russia's actions have been predictable, giving historical opposition to NATO enlargement since the 1990s. In fear of losing influence over Ukraine, a critical buffer state, he criticized Western leaders for having ignored geopolitical realities and for having clung to liberal ideas like democracy and economic integration that underestimated Russia's security concerns. NATO's expansion had started under Clinton, adding countries like Poland and the Baltics, and later considered Ukraine and Georgia despite Russian objections, culminating in Putin's 2008 invasion of Georgia as a warning, which the Russians are occupying to this day. So they're occupying parts of Georgia, to be fair, not all of Georgia. The West's missteps, including his support for the 2014 coup and his push to align Ukraine with the EU and NATO, had disregarded Russia's red lines, Mearsheimer argued. He saw Putin's response as defensive, not an attempt to rebuild the Soviet Empire, which is obviously true, noting that Russia lacked the power to occupy Ukraine long term, which is also true. He proposed that the West should have abandoned its goal of integrating Ukraine and instead made a neutral buffer to de-escalate tensions and benefit all parties, warning that continuing the existing policies risk further conflict and Ukrainian ruin, which is what ended up happening. Yeah, I mean, this is when Putin first invaded Ukraine in 2022. Hillary Clinton came out, if you remember, said that we need to turn Ukraine into Putin's Afghanistan, because everybody assumed that Putin would just go into Kyiv, take the entire country, and try to and try to occupy it long term, which the Russians clearly couldn't do. So this is why Putin never did that. It kind of undermined the U.S.'s strategy initially, kind of like the strategy the U.S. used with the Soviet Union to bankrupt the Soviet Union in Afghanistan in the 80s. When they invaded Afghanistan and spent over 10 years there, they spent billions of dollars there. The U.S. funded the Mujahideen in order to fight the Soviets, continue fighting the Soviets until the Soviets ran out of money, which led to the collapse of the Soviet Union. The U.S. was hoping to do the same thing here, but it didn't work because Putin didn't actually occupy Ukraine. He's holding parts of Ukraine, but it's not like he's occupying the whole country. So, 23, Defense Secretary Perry Neely resigned over expansion. In his 2015 memoir, former Secretary of Defense William J. Perry revealed that he nearly resigned in 1996 over NATO expansion, fearing that it would unravel U.S.-Russia relations and heighten nuclear risks. Perry saw NATO expansion as the start of a series of U.S. and NATO moves that Russia viewed as threatening, including missile defense systems in Europe, military actions against Serbia, and offers of NATO membership to Ukraine and Georgia. Together, they signaled to Russia that the U.S. disregarded its interests, a shift Perry found deeply concerning and dangerous, which it was, 100%. Door keep closing. Sorry about that. Noam Chomsky, NATO expansion led to war. In 2015, Professor Noam Chomsky argued that NATO's advance to Russia borders in 2014 coup made Ukraine's Western alignment unacceptable to any Russian leader, directly causing the conflict. Here's the thing. It doesn't matter whether it's Putin or some other Russian leader. It doesn't matter. That still would be unacceptable to any Russian leader to have Ukraine join NATO or join the EU. The idea that Ukraine would join a Western military alliance would be quite unacceptable to any Russian leader. Gorbachev agreed to allow Germany to join NATO with a quid pro quo that NATO would not expand one inch further to the east. NATO instantly moved to East Germany, and then Clinton came along and then NATO right to the borders of Russia. So let's actually hear Chomsky here.
The idea that Ukraine might join a Western military alliance would be quite unacceptable to any Russian leader. This goes back to 1990, when the Soviet Union collapsed. There was a question as to what would happen with NATO. Gorbachev agreed to allow Germany to be unified and to join NATO. It's a pretty remarkable concession, with a quid pro quo that NATO would not expand 1 inch to the east. That was the phrase that was used.
So Russia has been provoked?
What happened?
Yes.
NATO instantly moved to East Germany and came along, expanded NATO right to the borders of Russia.
They were provoked.
Now there are the new Ukrainian government, the government after the overthrow of the preceding one, the parliament voted, I think 300 to 8 or something like that, to move to join NATO.
Which you can understand why they would want to join NATO. You can see why Petro Poroshenko's government would probably see that it's protecting his country.
No, it's not protecting. Crimea was taken away after the overthrow of the government.
It was after.
Right? And he's not protecting Ukraine, is threatening Ukraine with major war. That's not protection. The point is, this is a serious strategic threat to Russia, which any Russian leader would have to react to.
Again, any Russia, doesn't matter whether it's Putin or some other Russian leader that comes into power. In this exact scenario, they would have invaded Ukraine. No matter whether it's Putin or Navalny, if he somehow became president, or whoever was Russian president, they would have invaded Ukraine in order to protect their interests. So this idea that somehow Russia is like I'm sorry, I forget the aggressor. That's what I'm looking for. All right, so let's, here we go. Let's make this a little bigger so you guys can actually see it. Here we go. Nuland highlights U.S. support for Ukraine's new government in 2016. In 2016, Victoria Nuland testified before Congress about the significant U.S. role in supporting Ukraine's government after 2014 coup. She explained that the U.S. advisors served in 12 Ukrainian ministries. U.S. trained police force operated in 18 Ukrainian cities. U.S. Treasury helped close 60 Ukrainian banks while protecting the assets of depositors. And the U.S. spent $266 million on training Ukrainian soldiers. Look at the waste of all that taxpayer money. I mean, it's beyond outrageous. It's beyond out.
And U.S. advisors serve in almost a dozen Ukrainian ministries and localities, helping to deliver services, eliminate fraud and abuse, improve tax collection, and modernize Ukrainian institutions. With U.S. help, newly vetted and trained police officers are patrolling the streets of 18 Ukrainian cities. In courtrooms across Ukraine, free legal aid attorneys funded by the U.S. have won 2/3 of all the acquittals in the countries. Treasury and State Department advisors have helped Ukraine shutter over 60 failed banks and protected the assets of depositors. And since there can be no reform in Ukraine without security, over $266 million of our support has been in the security sector, training 1,200 soldiers and 750 Ukrainian National Guard personnel, and supplying life-saving gear. In FY16, we are continuing that training and equipment of more of Ukraine's border guards, military.
So in fiscal year 2016, they spent even more money on all this bullshit that they spent money on. That's one evil. Victoria Nuland's one evil bitch. I'll tell you that. But she's just as bad, if not worse, than Hillary Clinton is. I mean, thank God she's no longer in the American government. So I'm not sure how much more is left. I do have to wrap up soon, but let's see. I'm going to try to get through this as quickly as possible. I want to thank everybody for watching, their patience, because this is quite important to watch, and it's quite long too. So I'm already almost at an hour and a half here. So CIA constructs secret spy bases in Ukraine in 2016. In 2016, the CIA started building 12 covert spying bases along Ukraine's border with Russia. This operation remained hidden until New York Times revealed it in February 2024. So this is the, that's not the article, but it's the picture of the article. So the spy war, how the CIA secretly helps Ukraine fight Putin. See, they put it in a positive light. For more than a decade, the United States have nurtured a secret intelligence partnership with Ukraine that is now critical for both countries encountering Russia. So again, it's positive. It's a positive spin. I don't know how much longer this is, but let's see. Biden rejects Putin NATO expansion red line. During a phone call December 2021, President Biden rejected President Putin's demand that NATO not expand to Ukraine. This is what led to the fucking invasion. Exactly what led to the invasion in 2022. So for liberal commentators on the internet here to run their mouths about Russia's the aggressor, Ukraine's the victim. Bullshit. Who's technically Russia's the victim. Russia has been the victim for decades in this battle, this geopolitical battle. They've been the victims. Ukraine is unfortunately just a proxy stuck in the middle of U.S. and Russia. This proxy war has been going on for decades. So it says, namely, that means the U.S. isn't accepting Putin demand that Ukraine be denied interest in the North Atlantic Treaty Organization, aka NATO. Biden affirms NATO's open door for Ukraine 2022. In January 2022, Russia again saw a U.S. promise that Ukraine would not join NATO. This is before the invasion. The Biden administration Secretary of State Antony Blinken responded by confirming that NATO's door remained open to Ukraine. There you go. That leads right to the fucking invasion. But no. According to liberal commentators in this internet space, it's not. Russia's the aggressor. Remember, Russia's the aggressor, not Ukraine. They're the victims. So I think this is the last one. Let me see if there's any more here. Looks like I saw something down here. No, that's it. So yeah. So that's the thread. What an amazing thread here by let me get the account name down. Sorry about that. Kananoa the Great. Fantastic account. Why am I not following this account? Well, let me follow it now. I thought I was following the account. I guess, I was following. I guess X or Twitter unfollowed me. That's bullshit. So it's at Kananoa the Great. So there it is right there. This is the that's the handle. So if you haven't, make sure you follow this account. It's a lot of great stuff, great information here. And let's see. So yeah, I want to thank everybody very, very much for watching. Oops, there we go. Because let's just stop sharing that for now. So here we go. And you see me again. I was kind of like this, like, oh, I'm so tired. sit back up. Let me turn on my little light here so you guys can actually see me. That's a little too bright. Hold on. All right, there we go. Now you can see me. So yeah, so that's that. Now we've established the fact that Russia is not the aggressor in this proxy war. It's clearly not even Ukraine, to be fair. It's the U.S. and NATO. They're the aggressors in this war. They're the aggressors, U.S. and NATO. They kept expanding eastward, even though the U.S. made a promise to Gorbachev that they wouldn't expand eastward after letting Germany unite and joining NATO. That was supposed to be it. Instead, starting with Clinton and working its way to today, NATO expanded all the way to Russia's border. And the only state that's really left is Ukraine and Georgia. So only two states left that have not been able to join NATO. And the reason why Joe Biden was so keen on Ukraine joining NATO because he was behind the coup in 2014 that led to Yanukovych's ouster. And once Yanukovych was gone, then that was an opportunity for Ukraine to actually join NATO and the EU. And once Putin did the invasion, that wasn't going to happen. So there you go, ladies and gentlemen. That's the history of U.S. That's the history of U.S. NATO Eastern expansion and why that directly led to the Ukraine war. So don't listen to these liberal commentators, these Democrat liberal commentators on YouTube telling you that Russia is the aggressor and Putin is an imperialist, just like Trump is. And don't listen to any of that bullshit. Total bullshit, total lies. So don't listen to any of that crap. So I want to thank everybody very much for watching this special edition of Angel in the Afternoon. I'm Angel Rivera. I'm pretty sure this will air on Sunday night around 7 o'clock probably. So at 10 o'clock Eastern, make sure you watch How Did You Miss That with Indian Reef. Very, fantastic show this guy's doing. I'm playing with stuff. Sorry about that. And make sure you and boat smashing into other boats. I butchered that for some reason. That'll be at midnight Eastern usually tonight, so check that out as well. I want to thank everybody for watching. Make sure you like, make sure you subscribe, make sure if you guys want to help me out with a donation, those links in the description box below, or you can go to the upper left-hand corner there and with your cell phone and use your QR code, and it'll go to my Ko-fi, which you can do a donation there. Like I've said before, that money will be used only to help the quality of the show and to maybe help pay my internet bill every once in a while. By the way, this light here, which is this little thing here, I got thanks to I was able to get thanks to a donation, $10 donation from Sean. Greatly appreciate that. So that way you can see my face better and I'm not in the dark all the time. So thank you very much, Sean, for that donation. And if you guys feel like, you're able to donate, a link's in the description box below. If not, make sure to like, subscribe, hang out in the chat. I'll be there with you guys since this is pre-recorded. And I'm going to see you guys next Friday for Angel in the Afternoon. That'll be episode 99. We're closing in on 100, which is a huge deal. I never thought I'd be doing 100 episodes of the show, but we're almost there. So I want to thank everybody for watching, like and subscribe. Stay tuned for How Do We Miss That, 10 o'clock Eastern. And we'll see you guys on Friday for Angel in the Afternoon. Have a nice weekend. Have a nice week. And